time for Campaign Chronicles, our regular countdown to the presidential election. And for that, I'm joined by our French politics editor, Mark Perlman. Good evening to you, Mark.
Good evening.
Our media editor, James Creedon, will also be popping in a bit later for some reaction on the blogs and the press as well. Now, a bit of strategic campaigning by President Nicolas Sarkozy first. He's been praising one of his rivals, and it's not François Hollande, but a chap a little further to the left, Jean-Luc Mélenchon. These two share very little political ground, do they? What is going on here?
It's pure political strategy. Here how it works. Nicolas Sarkozy is having a two-pronged approach. He's courting the far left, but he's also courting the center. So the first part is propping up Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who's been on the rise in the polls. He's at the helm of the so-called Left Front, which comprises the Communist Party. And in recent weeks, Sarkozy, his lieutenants, have been heaping praise on Jean-Luc Mélenchon, although they have nothing to do in terms of ideology. Mélenchon wants to nationalize many companies. Sarkozy is much more in favor of the free market. And here is an example of one of the recent remarks by the president on the campaign trail. He said, I'm just quoting him, about Jean-Luc Mélenchon, of course, I don't agree with him, but I find that he's a man who's got a lot of character and who's got a kind of talent. He says what he thinks. There are so many in politics who don't say what they think. And this prompted a response by Jean-Luc Mélenchon in a recent interview with France 24, RFI, and other media. Let's watch what Jean-Luc Mélenchon had to say about the compliments from someone from the right.
He knows very well that I'm his toughest adversary. On an ideological level, not a personal one. I don't know him and he doesn't know me. He's a fighter and I'm a fighter. But I'm his toughest adversary and he knows it.
Oh, he seemed quite flattered there, didn't he? Now, if Hollande is forced to become more leftist than he is already, this will scare off centrist voters. That's presumably what Sarkozy is trying to do here.
Yes, that's part two of the strategy. Part one was propping up the far left, and part two is trying to prey the centrists. So on its face, Nicolas Sarkozy is campaigning to court far-right voters by insisting on crime, immigration, now, of course, all the terrorism issues related to the Toulouse tragedy, but he's also trying to figure out how he can woo the centrist voters, and the main target is the centrist leader, François Bayrou, who's been polling around 11 to 13%. Nicolas Sarkozy has his lieutenants say those last few days that, well, if he is re-elected, he might actually appoint François Bayrou as his prime minister. So it's clearly for François Bayrou, this would be the kiss of death. But Nicolas Sarkozy knows that he needs those voters, especially in the second round. And so by letting it known that he could appoint their leader as the prime minister, he's trying to make sure Hollande makes a mistake. The problem for Hollande is that he cannot use that same strategy because he cannot prop up the far-right leader, Marine Le Pen, because obviously this would be a major controversy here in France because of her very extremist views. So he has to be careful and hope that Jean-Luc Mélenchon doesn't climb up too much so he doesn't end up taking with him too much of his ideas, and so he doesn't scare off the center.
Okay, all right. So James Creedon's joined us now. Everybody's talking about everybody else today. We just had Sarkozy talking about Jean-Luc Mélenchon. Mélenchon's been talking about François Hollande.
That's right. Mark and I were talking about this. This was in Lille yesterday, right? And this goes back, I suppose he's referring to an episode when François Hollande was interviewed by The Guardian, this around the time he went to London last year. And he said, oh, there are no more communists in France. This was in a bid to reassure the city and investors in London, you could say. No more communists in France. You know, the French, you know, we're not dangerous. Don't worry about us. It's fine. I think we have the headline that, as it was taken by Le Point here. Hollande au Guardian, aujourd'hui, il n'y a pas de communistes en France. Well, let's take a listen to how Jean-Luc Mélenchon reacted to that yesterday in Lille.
The Guardian, à qui j'ai l'honneur de déclarer we are very dangerous. Thousands of red flags of the Parti communiste. Oui, 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 des communistes, il y en a partout.
Right.
Yeah. It's a bit scary, isn't it?
1, 2, 3, 4 communists, a lot more than 4 as well. So I think Hollande was definitely wrong, right? And if we have a quick look on Twitter, people reacting to that, we are very dangerous. as Mélenchon said. And this person saying, well, yes, the communists are a real danger for the future of France. So getting a bit worried about the fact that Mélenchon could be prime minister, the communists could be in government back to 1981.
Oh, just as Cuba's moving away from communism, France is going back there.
There
All right,
you go.
now let's talk about Sarkozy again, because he's been pretty open, hasn't he, about mistakes that he's made in the past. But he's saying now if he's re-elected, it'll be very different.
Yes, he was supposed to actually write a book, a kind of book where he would confess to his mistakes, but apparently, we're told, it was much too personal, and his advisor talked him out of it, saying, no, don't write a book. So he's been giving tidbits here and there. He said he was wrong to celebrate his election 5 years ago in a posh restaurant, the Champs-Élysées. He was wrong to try to have his son appointed to a prominent position. And now in this week's Paris Match, he actually is asked how he would be different. And he essentially says that, well, he would, yes, it would be different because he's learned from the past years. And one of the things he's learned is that he essentially behaved like a minister rather than a president, meaning that he was too much a hands-on president and that he couldn't delegate. He couldn't delegate and couldn't take the distance and solemnity that goes with a presidential function. And this is responding to the criticism, that he was a so-called hyper president.
And it's an attempt at humility, isn't it? Because he has been called arrogant more than once. All right, now the French Green Party did extremely well, didn't they, in the European elections? So everybody thought they might do well in the presidential elections. Not the case, is it? They've barely made a splash.
Oh, I mean, they're just in a hole and they're digging deeper. I mean, it's just a catastrophe. They were around 13, 15% in recent regional European elections, and they were, becoming a mainstay of French politics. However, their candidate, former investigating magistrate, Eva Joly, is polling around 1 to 3%. And the Greens are really getting nervous, first of all, because this would be a bad score. Second, because their finances are really in dire straits right now. And so what can you do when your things are not going well? The party leader, Cécile Duflot, didn't talk about nuclear power, didn't talk about the environment. She talked about the president and how she felt he was really a bad president and an even worse candidate.
That's a really murky way of doing politics, really rotten tactics. That's the kind of thing that Jean-Marie Le Pen might have said. What does a wave of immigration mean? When he talks like that, he sounds like he's from the far right. I hope the French will teach him a lesson.
All right, now some of the other smaller candidates are complaining that they're being shut out of the national debate, aren't they? And some people might not even have heard of Nicolas Dupont-Aignan. But he's been trying to get in the headlines today, hasn't he? Yeah,
Nicolas Dupont-Aignan is a former Gaullist who broke away from the Gaullist UMP party, and he's polling around 1%. And today he found a new cause. He says it's a shame that there will be no debate between the 10 candidates for the presidential election. And the reason is that they are all wimps.
The French should know that there won't be any public debate between the 10 candidates for the first round, because the two main candidates can't face being confronted with Mélenchon, myself, Madame Le Pen or Bayrou. They wouldn't last 5 minutes in front of me because they're lying to the French.